starting back in 1948 when I was born in Kaukauna, Wisconsin, a little town just south of Green Bay, north of Appleton, Wisconsin, in the Fox River Valley. One of 5 kids. My parents, paper mill worker for my dad, and then later on, once things got pretty tough, my mom became a nurse's aide, so she worked at night while my dad worked during the day, so there was usually somebody with us. Second oldest, have an older brother and then 3 younger brothers and a younger sister who was way behind us, probably 8 years younger than me. And we grew up in a little town called Kaukauna, up in the frozen tundra. It was a blue-collar town, either dairy farms or paper mills. And we knew from a very young age that we were not going to work on a dairy farm or work in a paper mill. And our parents made it very clear that education was a way out. So we grew up in an environment where it was small town, everybody knew everybody, but we had free run of the town, sort of a Disney World environment to grow up in, because they let us out in the morning, we'd play football, baseball, softball, go down to the local swimming pool, come back in time for dinner at night, and my dad would whistle and everybody in the neighborhood could hear him, and we'd come running home. And we grew up that way, and we never knew what we did or didn't have, but we all knew that we weren't going to have calluses on our hands when we grew up. We wanted to get out. When I turned 16, it really hit home, because then my dad managed to get a work permit for me to go to the local cemetery and work in the cemetery. John was the gravedigger, and he brought me back into the big shed. It was a cold storage shed, and he opens the door, and there's 24 coffins in there. And he says, "This is what you're going to be doing. We're going to be burying these people," because in the winter, the ground froze solid in northern Wisconsin, and you had to wait until April or May for the ground to start to unfreeze, and you could bury people. And he flips open the first coffin, and it's a neighbor guy who died in January. And you think you'd be traumatized by that, but I needed the job, and I'm interviewing for it. And it was Mr. Afa, the neighbor, and I said, "Oh," and the guy, John says, "He's looking good, isn't he?" And I said, "Yeah, he's looking pretty good." So he closes the coffin. He says, "You're hired." But I learned that I was not going to make a living like that or in the paper mill. Bernie Hubbards was the English teacher, well known throughout the state and the area, got wind of the fact that Carroll College could offer me a scholarship. This is Carroll University now. And with a work-study program and a grant and a loan, I could go to college, a private school. So he was really the one that put me in that direction. And I applied and got in pretty readily. But I remember the day my parents dropped me off, and they had their blue suitcase and 2 big grocery bags. They were the paper grocery bags full of my clothes. And they brought me up to my room, and it was a little dorm room, and I had a roommate on one side, and I was on the other side. My mom starts unpacking my clothes from the bag in the suitcase and putting them in this little dresser we had. And then they wished me good luck, picked up their suitcase and went back, left me with the 2 paper bags and my clothes. And that was the beginning of my career at Carroll College. Did really well there, enjoyed it. I was president of fraternity. Was going to look at possibility going on to grad school, but had met my fiancée at that time, my sophomore year, and we were going to get married after I graduated. And I was going to teach, had a teaching contract at Waukesha High School. So I was all set. And that's when Reagan came out with a new declaration that there were no more teaching deferments. So I went back up to Appleton before the draft board and said, "Look, I've got a teaching certificate, and I'd like to have a deferment from the draft." And of course, the Selective Service Board turned to me and said, they gave me 3 options. And the first was to go to Canada. I could run off to Canada, or I could go in the Army, go in the military, or I could go to jail. Take my choice. Making a long story short, the military experience was really beneficial in a way, because my dad had been in World War II, and he had been in for the duration, but never talked about it except to give me 2 pieces of advice. One was to never volunteer for anything, but if there was schooling involved, take advantage of the schooling. So I went to Fort Campbell and then Fort Sill for advanced training. It was about December, must have been 70, said December of 70, and then the commanding officer brought me into the headquarters, and he says, "Look, orders came down for Germany, and we're going to let you go. Merry Christmas." When I hightailed it out there, packed her back to Wisconsin, my wife back to Wisconsin, went to Fort Dix and shipped out to Germany. So they held me down by Nuremberg in a unit called in Zerndorf, and it was an artillery battery. but they were also tied to NATO on a special weapons unit. And so they assigned me to that special weapons unit. I brought my wife over, and we did a lot of field training. Never knew when we were going and where we were going, but it was quite an experience to see a lot of Europe and a lot of Germany. My wife and I went to France and Austria, and she tagged along with me to some of the schools that I went to. Vietnam was winding down in 71, 72, so they offered an early out and picked up my wife, and she was back in Wisconsin at that time, filled a little U-Haul, and we went to New Mexico because her parents, after she got married, abandoned Waukesha and went to New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, to get a warmer climate, to get out from the Wisconsin blizzards and all of that. So we went to New Mexico, and I hooked on. She went to Southwest Bell, so she was very fortunate there, and I went to work for Caterpillar Tractor and had the GI Bill behind me, which at that time was a really solid bill. It allowed you to go to school for, at that time, 48 months, and they paid you like $185 a month, which at that time was a lot of money. So I wanted to apply to University of North Texas. It was North Texas State University at the time. Went into their grad school for library science. I went into the information science portion of it and really did well there, really enjoyed it. A company out of Houston, part of Columbia Gas System, was looking, they had a research center, and they were looking for somebody like me with the information science to run their library and their information facility. So I went down there and spent 6 years in Houston, really enjoyed it. And in the meantime, went to the University of Houston under the GI Bill and picked up an MBA. So I had the MLS and the MBA. But then the city of Hearst had built a brand new library. I mean, a state-of-the-art library for this little city. It was really unique. And A.J. Brown was city manager, and he got wind of me, and he sent his assistant down to interview me in my home with my wife. Well, she must have reported back to him that, hey, you got to take a look at this guy. So I was going to a conference in Dallas, and A.J. and his wife picked me up at the hotel and take me and my wife out to eat. And we spent a couple of hours at that dinner, and he offered me the job then. And I said, well, I didn't know anything about public libraries. I said, well, that sounds interesting. He says, well, come on for a tour. At least take the tour. They're taking me on this tour now in 1980, and it really was nice. And then they took me to the library, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what did they do here? I didn't know the full story of what they were looking for, but he made me an offer, and he says, look, if you can do these 3 things within a year or 2, I will bump you to whatever you request. Provide that leadership, bring in the VIA program, and automate the library, which I thought, oh my gosh, they're offering me an opportunity to automate the library. Good. 2 years later, we had a VIA program that was one of the stellar programs in the state. And then we had worked with HCE Computers on the second goal, which was automation. Henry Eder was the key, and Bill Allman was the project manager. And we spent 2 years developing our own library automation system called IELPS, which NCR backed, and they were starting to promote it nationally. I mean, it really started to take off. In fact, they sold it to 2 or 3 cities while I was still there. And then the third was the leadership. The library had to have some leadership, and we just started working with the managers in the library and developing strategic plans and goals, and not relying on resources as much as the facilities and the programs, and looking at it entirely differently. And brought on some people that were really much more aware of what library services could actually be in the community. So at the end of 2 years, I had accomplished those, and A.J. Brown was good about it. A.J. Brown was there for about a year while I was here, maybe a year and a half, and then he left to go into the private sector, and the Jim Starr came on board. And Jim Starr saw a little bit more potential in me, and in 1984 he offered me a new job that was created, Director of Community Services, and gave me Parks and Recreation along with the library and the volunteer program. And at that time, Parks and Recreation was in dire straits. I mean, they had some nice facilities, but they couldn't maintain them. They had a great recreation center, but very weak programming. 1 or 2 special events that were marginally attended, and he wanted me to turn Parks and Recreation around like I had turned the library around. So again, it's sort of that catalyst for change. Started to bring on people that actually had degrees, because before that, in the Parks and Rec department, you just moved up because somebody left. And as you moved up, it was kind of like the old union system where you were there the longest, it was your turn. I made that change. And it was pretty tough on these people, but we made that change. And then I held them all accountable. And then I made them all look at a vision or a strategic plan. You couldn't just go through day by day. You had to go through that day because it meant something long term. We turned things around completely. We had state-of-the-art ball fields. People came from all over to use the soccer fields. The Hearst United Soccer Association had to split up into recreation and select because they were getting people from North Dallas coming in, and they wanted to be competitive. Tri-Cities had some new baseball fields. We created those. Hearst Girls, we started to use the adult complex for Hearst Girls. And Frank Dorn was the head of Hearst Girls at that time. He was very demanding. He held us accountable. And because of that, we managed to get 2 national girls softball tournaments in Hearst on those fields. The programming started to take off. We had a major extravaganza. We started to do the senior banquet, started to really have an impact because we were doing things much differently because we were catering to the seniors, not to staff. We started a tree lighting ceremony. We started a 4th of July ceremony. So anyway, at the end of that time period, we had a really good handle on library and on parks, on recreation, on the VIA program. And that's when Jim Starr promoted me to assistant city manager based on my work I had done with the library, with parks and recreation and the volunteer program, and then projects. And projects came into play because in '92, we floated the half-cent sales tax. And that meant once it passed that community services had about $5 million a year to put into facilities and programs. And my goal was to make that half-cent work, was to use those funds to the benefit of the community and to use them in such a fashion that we had a strategic plan on how we used them. We just didn't happen to do things on an ad hoc basis. And we developed a 10-year plan, presented that to him, of course, the city manager, and the city council, and of course the park board and the library board. And when everybody bought into it, we just started implementing that plan. And later on, I'll mention a few of the impacts, and some of those impacts that we had were tremendous at that time. But as far as my career went, that really set the stage for Allan Weger to come into play when he became city manager. So I had A.J. Brown and Jim Starr up until I was assistant city manager, and then Allan Weger made me deputy city manager and gave me facilities. And facilities was a unique division because it had to really turn itself around so that when somebody walked into a building or any facility that we had, it was transparent to them. The lights worked and the AC worked and the heat worked and the plumbing worked, which was really an anomaly in the city because that didn't happen. You put in a work order and it may or may not get fixed if it ever did. But we really turned that around, and it created a division and put my project manager in charge of it, created a lot of pride in what they were doing and gave them the responsibility to interact with the customer, which were all of the other employees. And they took that and really did well with it. So by that time I had facilities, and as deputy city manager, I was there for a number of years in that position until the very end when Clay Carruthers took over. And Clay saw that same catalyst for change in me and gave me IT to do the same thing in IT that we did in facilities, to make IT transparent to people so that their computers worked, the software worked, the systems worked, the network worked. And that was a goal. And it was like a 4-year goal, and I did 2 years of the goal before I retired. And finally, age and everything else caught up with me, and I retired as a deputy city manager. So that was sort of the milestones in the career. Each one of those representing sort of a catalyst for change or being a change agent. Everything we did was designed to have that balance in the community that would make people stop and say, well, I could live anywhere. Across the street is Bedford. Over here is Colleyville. Over here is there's North Richland Hills. And why do you want to live in Hearst? Well, we decided to, me and my staff decided to do those things that would make city a place that you would like to live in. And of course, we had city council saying the same thing, and we had all of the boards and commissions saying the same thing. So we had a good support. And we started that, I think, with the library. If we want to look at the trajectory of my career, started in the library. In order to be that catalyst for change, we turned the library's focus from resources into programming, where we developed the Masterworks program, which funded the arts and at the same time provided a product for the community with the performances. We had the automation system, which was could have gone nationally, it almost did. And we had summer reading clubs that were designed for the children and for adults and for young adults, teens. And at the same time, I have to kick the volunteer program in there because that library was a focal point of the VIA program, and people would come from all over. In fact, I would make presentations at ICMA and TCMA over this volunteer program because the library had really supported it. And fiber optics were brought in because we gave up the studio opportunities with Black Hawk Cable in order for them to run high-speed network service between the library and City Hall to support our automation system. And it was so popular that people from all over came to investigate how we did it and who did it and why it was done and what it would do. And putting that all together, it moved the library in a far different direction than it had been in the past. We did the original library, had the first edition, I don't remember the year, but it included the expansion into the children's area and the big reading room and the computer center. And those were major components of a library that we didn't have before. The computer center was brand new because we were going not in the direction of cable programming again, but we were using those resources, my staff, again going back to Debbie Smith at that time, and that was followed up by Jesse in order to develop a computer center. And that was sort of state of the art at the time. And then we had this big reading room, which we hadn't had before. We made real advances in the children's area. Created staff rooms that we didn't have before. And that was followed by the second expansion, which was the meeting room. And the meeting room actually added two rooms, a big children's room on the east side, and then we fully expanded the meeting room so that we could have larger programs. Masterworks was selling out, literally. It was standing room only, and now we had room to put more people in for Masterworks. So we knew that our programming was going well. And in both of those cases, the referendums passed by about 76 to 78%. So those were good votes to approve those bonds to build those facilities. So Parks and Recreation. We'll handle parks first and then recreation because they're really two distinct divisions. But in parks, we really took the bull by the horns. And once that organization started to bring on some people that had degrees in turf management and in landscape design, we started to turn things around pretty quickly. Fixed up the soccer fields. We developed some major parks, our community park. We developed Mayfair Park. We developed Echo Hills Park. We built two brand new aquatic centers. We also looked at how we could operate and maintain those so that when people showed up, it was the same thing as what I call transparency. They were there and they were in good shape. You didn't have to worry about fire ants and potholes and broken swings and those type of things. We put up all of the playgrounds, and there were like 17 playgrounds on a rotational basis to be replaced every 10 years so that every year a new playground was replaced. I mean, those are the type of things that really stood out. We acquired enough land to build a community park. We acquired the property to develop Rickle Park, a really unique natural park in Southhurst. So a lot was done within a very short period of time, and the catalyst for that was the half-cent sales tax that threw that $5 million a year into the Community Services Development Fund. One of the unique things we did with the half-cent sales tax in 1992 to 94, and we developed a 10-year plan. The first part of that plan was to replace the two concrete boxes that we had at Central and Chisholm, which were the old swimming pools, traditional swimming pools, nothing more than a concrete box with a diving board. So we decided to do something unique, that we wanted to build an aquatic center. So I sent my assistant, Steve Polisek, with a big video camera to a place in Missouri to see one of these things. And they had one. So we spent a good 9 months developing these designs, these plans, sold them through the board to the city council, city management, and then we built them. And thousands of people came. They were so unique at that time. They were definitely in the state, first in the area. And outside of Missouri, we hadn't found another one. So the next year, we decided to do the same thing with Chisholm, because Chisholm was on its last leg too. And so we went back and did all the design work for a different type of water park, one that fit into the more natural environment. So they were distinctly different, and we put different components in each one. And they took off. We had never operated anything like that before. None of my staff had. And we packed thousands of people in there a day. And of course, it bruised the water so bad that we couldn't keep them open. And we had to hire a lady out of California, Allison Orzinski, to come in and tell us, you're really messing this up because you're putting too many people in. You've got to have capacities on your pool. Well, we never had capacities before. Well, that created quite a stir because half the community couldn't go in that day. And after we got a handle on that, they became first-class facilities. And then other cities would come and visit, and before long, other cities were building these too. And to make a long story short on that part of the equation, 20 years later, before I retired, we rebuilt them again. We built Central into a modern aquatic center, and then we rebuilt Chisholm into a more modern aquatic center. We operated the tennis center at the same time. Like everything else, it was sort of haphazard at best, little concrete hut that was out there, semi-professionally run. The people that were there were actually tennis professionals, but they had no accountability. So we had the funding to redo the tennis center. We rebuilt the tennis center, rebuilt a tennis center pro shop, brought on people that knew what they were doing, and turned that around completely. So that became one of the top tennis centers in the area. In fact, people from all over North Texas would come to play there, especially their tournaments. We did a major improvement to the recreation center. We had a small gym and some classrooms and a real small fitness center. You could put a couple of machines in, and that was it. Well, we got a grant from the state and about $4 or $5 million of bonds. Again, the public approved it by about 78%, and we built a brand new recreation center in essence. The old gym stayed there, but Bill Heindel was the architect, and his instructions were to build a new facility so that we could double or triple the number of senior citizens at the annual banquet. And I would go before the park board with the plans, the preliminary plans, and I would go before the city council with the plans. And they'd always ask about, how's the senior banquet going to fit in this? That was their primary concern. And the two gyms were divided by a huge glass wall that could be slid open so that it was all one big room. And I to this day, I think that $5 million project only succeeded is because we could put the senior banquet in the two halls. When I took over recreation, there were recreation at that time was designed, I think, for staff. They had a pretty good time working there, but nobody held them accountable either. And they had to turn the recreation center around because it was a nice facility, but they didn't have much programming except for some children's programming, some daycare programs. So again, it was a matter of bringing on the right staff, which wasn't easy because there was a lot of pushback by the existing staff. They were old school, and I had to bring on my change agents, my catalysts for changes, in order to come in and start moving things around. And we brought in some really good people, started a program for adults and children so that all those classrooms down there were used for everything from aerobics to spin to yoga to ceramics at that time, dance, judo, I mean, things for the whole community. And then we had the basketball course. We developed a real nice basketball league out of that. And at the same time, we decided to start kicking up our special events. And to this day, we have some of the top special events in the area. I mean, the extravaganza is really a classic example of how we took a little Easter egg hunt and turned it into a real nice event for the family. We were given the opportunity to develop a new program around the 4th of July. And of course, we did things the community service way, where we always paid attention to detail and did our homework and kept it professional, but we always tried to do a little bit more every year. We had 3 major bands show up. We had a huge activity area over on the west lawn with all types of carnival activities. At one time, under Mayor Ward, we even had a children's parade around the area. And then we would shoot off these fireworks, close proximity fireworks, but get the FAA approval to really push the envelope as high and as as well as we could. And they were some of the best fireworks in the area. I mean, people would come from all over. And even though you may have 50 or 60,000 people on site, the community surrounding it was packed with people, not only in their yards, but the church's parking lot and the business parking lots. So those are the type of things that we really did. The same thing with the tree lighting. The tree lighting ceremony took over from the library, had a little ceremony in front of the library. They did the best they could. It was a fun little event. And then we moved to City Hall to become a fun, bigger event. Well, then we moved to the conference center where it became a huge event. Thousands would show up. Again, we'd fire fireworks off. We'd have train rides. We'd have a marketplace. We'd have a snow hill because it was one of those things that if we got the chance or the opportunity to do something, we not only did it, but we did it better than you could. And every year we would elaborate on it. At that time, Hearst and Bedford shared a senior citizen center over at the Bedford Boys Ranch. And the idea through the agreement was that Hearst would pay half of all operating costs and Bedford would pay half of all operating costs. So we would meet with them every year, and my responsibility was to oversee that senior center from the Hearst standpoint. Unfortunately, every year when we'd go in for the budget setting, we would request this, this, and this in order to build that program. And Bedford would deny because they didn't want to fund it. They didn't have the funds. You know, we always come in, I guess, like the rich neighbor, and they didn't have the funds, so we never got anywhere with it. And we developed a plan, just like everything else, like the aquatic centers, to develop a state-of-the-art model senior citizen facility and program. And we never built a facility. We built an activity center because we never wanted a facility without the activities. And they created a board, the Senior Citizen Advisory Board, and we started working with them a year in advance under the planning. So you can see the results of that. We have a state-of-the-art senior citizen activity center, and it really replicates the rest of the facilities that we have. They're first-class, professionally run, and we tied that to Heritage Village, which is the major park in front of the senior center. Under facilities, their mission was to make everything transparent. And facilities then started looking at each facility and starting to look at where the weaknesses were and eliminate them so that people would walk into a facility, regardless if it was the customer or the staff, and everything would work. The things that make Hearst unique start with I suppose, community services, because that's my area of expertise. But we always had this philosophy that we would pay attention to detail. We would definitely be professional in everything we do. We would always have some vision or strategic plan on what we would do. And we would always look beyond just what we were doing and how it would impact the community in the future. And we managed to get an awful lot done because the staff embraced that. And by embracing it, we were able to convince a city manager, any one of these 3 or 4 boards, and the city council to pretty much agree with a lot of the things that we were able to accomplish. And that community service philosophy sometimes got us in trouble with other divisions because they would always think that the city manager was favoring us. But he was never favoring us. What he was doing, he was recognizing that we had done our homework, that we had run it by boards and had been second-guessed by everybody, that we knew where the funding was coming from and we knew what it would take to operate it, and that we could present it to city council effectively. That's how we got things done, pure and simple. I was probably involved in 4 major bond programs, and all of them were between 74 and 78% acceptable, which is great. You only need 51%, but so we're way up there. And they were all related to parks, rec, library, and seniors. And these people really embraced that. But again, we never went to the public, and we went to the public a lot. I remember one of the bond issues, I think it was the half cent. I made 26 meetings, 26 community presentations. And that is because we had done our homework and presented to the public why and what we were doing with that referendum. And I always use with my staff the analogy of a cake. And it's very clear to us that the cake, it's infrastructure, it's public works, it's the water and the wastewater and the roads and the channels. And it's basic. That's the cake. And then you have fire to make sure that we don't burn it down, that they're prevented or make sure the candles don't go awry. And then you have police protecting it. Okay, that's understandable. And then you have finance helping us pay for it. How do we get these things done? And now the other divisions, that come into play, making sure that economic development has the funds there for us to be able to keep adding to this cake or providing the cake. But we were the icing on the cake. We were the frosting. You go in and buy a cake. Or, for example, I take my little daughter or granddaughter into the bakery and, the cakes. So they go over and look at the cakes. And it wasn't the, the infrastructure or anything around it. It was the frosting on the cake. We provided that to this community. We made this, I think, a desirable place to live, to raise your family, to live, maybe to work or to work close by, but to live in Hearst. When we started doing some long-term strategic planning for the city as a whole, that dovetailed right in with what we did. When we did the good to great, there was a transforming Hearst. Me and my staff, we just kind of sat back and said, finally, somebody's doing what we're doing. I mean, not in an egotistical sense, but in the sense that this is the way things should be. And it wasn't because we were an island out here. It was because they just didn't do it. If you just did it, you'd be part of what we did too. And then the city kind of forced that issue by going through the good to great and transforming Hearst. And if you look at the city council and the boards, and then all of the other activities that I was involved in the community, that reflected what I liked. One of the reasons that I was successful and my staff was successful through all 39 years is because we had engaged boards. That we had the Park and Recreation Board, we had the Library Board, we had the Senior Advisory Board, and we had the Historical Commission. And these were citizens that were appointed by the city council, so they're either friends or neighbors or acquaintances of the council, and they kept us on our toes. They met every month, and we would prepare presentations for them every month of everything that we did that they would have to recognize or recommend to the city council. And these people are all good people. I mean, some of the names, if I could say, there was Alan Neese and Rod Robertson and Betty Whiteside and Carl Jones. We had Charles Swearingen, Kathy Thompson, I think Kathy Brotherton now. These people, I mean, I could go on and on. Bob Hampton, I hate to leave somebody out, but there'd be 70 names on the list. We're all engaged in helping us do our job. So an engaged board with an involved staff going up to city council made our job much more successful than it would have been otherwise. In my 39 years here, the probably the most obvious stability factor were the mayors. The first mayor was Bill Souter that I worked with, and he was followed by Richard Ward, and then he was followed by Henry Wilson. That's amazing. Over 39 years, 3 mayors. And I think that stability added to the council stabilities. A lot of the council members came up through the boards. Anna Holzer with the library board. We had Charles Swearingen, Bill McClendon, David Bowie, Kathy Thompson, Kathy Brotherton. These were all good people that came up through the board and went to city council. And they always had the philosophy that they would agree to disagree. And they would agree to disagree privately, but in public, they always had a unified, non-hidden agenda view of things. So it added to the stability of Hearst that other cities, just can't imagine. When I came in 1980, I lived in what was considered more of North Hearst, and that was off of Harwood, because there was not much north of that. Mayfair was starting to expand. Sears was about the only place to eat in town. There was another place on the freeway. I think it was called Gallagher's. I'm not sure, because I remember A.J. Brown taking me there when I first came, my first day. But there was nothing else. And I built my second home on Westover, and there was very little. That was the only lot left, but there was nothing going much north of that. My house on Luella I was the first-time owner. John Barfield built it on spec, and I came in and bought it. And you can't imagine that now because there's no land available. The whole community was just so small and undeveloped. The mall was brand new, and we'd go over to the mall, but it was not quite vacant, but almost, because my wife and I would scratch our heads. What's what's going on here? Where are the people? And North Hills Mall had just come online. And that was a competitor. Well, there were even fewer people over there. Well, this is really nice. There was no traffic, and there were no amenities. We had soccer fields, and we had the baseball complex. That was it. Oh, and the 2 concrete pools. There was this really nice tract of land in southeast Hearst that was unusable, primarily the floodplain. There was a road called Bluebonnet that went through it that was abandoned because they had to take out the bridge because of flooding. They called it the Devil's Backbone. It goes back years and years, long before I came to Hearst. But Cy Rickel, the Rickel company owned it, and Cy Rickel contacted us and said, hey, I might be willing to donate this land or sell it to you. Are you interested? Well, Jim Starr was a city manager at that time, and I don't know if we want this or not, but let's see what he has to offer. And I went back to our architects and said, hey, look at this land. Could we do something with it? They did these plans where we could put trail systems, a playground area, and it would be a beautiful natural area. And we're having the meeting, and Cy says, well, I want to talk about the land. And I said, yeah, we got these plans here. I put them on the table, and boy, he sits up and he starts looking at them. And, oh, wow, yeah, okay, what? And then he leans back and he looks at the mayor and he says, I tell you what, I'll give you the land at $85,000 to kick this off. Done deal. We did it. And now we have Rickel Park, which is one of the nicest natural parks in the area. You would never even know you're in Dallas-Fort Worth, but it's a beautiful park. Mayfair was a real classic example of change. We developed Mayfair Park probably 12 years ago, and it had been a 7-acre park that needed to be developed. It was just open land. It had been a nursery at one point in time. So we went with Half and Associates as our consultants and put together this plan. We had the funding lined up, about $2 million, to develop the park. And as usual, we present things to the park board, and then we always go to the homeowners, and we called a homeowners meeting for everybody in the area. We had a pretty big area. And we had our first meeting. We had these boards up that showed the playground and the pavilion and the trail system, and it was at the library, and they packed the library meeting room. And Francois was our consultant. He gets up there and he makes the presentation, and he gets halfway through it before this gentleman stands up, and he happens to be the homeowner adjacent to the park. And he starts swearing at Francois, telling him he doesn't like this plan, and we can go hell with it, and on. He's going on and on. And of course, the crowd is silent. And Francois, he's just stricken. He had never seen anybody take $2 million improvement and turn it down, let alone rail against it in a public meeting. So he comes over to the first row and sits down to me and says, Allan, what are we going to do? And I said, you're going to get back up there and handle this meeting. And he said, I don't think I can. And I said, okay, well, I'll go up with you. So we went up there, and another lady got up and said the same thing. It should be a home for the hawks and the foxes. We don't need to develop this. And I came out of A&M with a degree in landscape architecture and management, and I know this is the right thing to do with this land. Leave it the way it is. Well, we had finally adjourned, but after that meeting, a couple of people came up to me with families, and they said, we don't agree at all with those two. But they took over the meeting, and we were afraid to say anything. And I said, I'll tell you what, we're going to come back and have another meeting. And they had made a couple of recommendations on moving a practice field around. I said, we'll do that. And then we came back we moved the ball field. We came back to the neighbors on the second go around. Well, the lady starts up again. She gets up right off the bat as we're making the presentation on the new plans. And she says, I don't like this. And Francois gets up and says, well, I know you have a degree from A&M, but I've got a degree from Harvard in landscape design. And I think this is the right thing to do. Well, another guy stood up and he says, lady, the horse left the barn a long time ago. Will you sit down and let them carry on with the meeting? And by the time we were done, it was overwhelming. So anyway, we go ahead and we build the project, and we have the big dedication ceremony. And the day of the dedication, the mayor and the park board chairman are meeting ahead of time to review their notes. Here comes the guy across the street. And I'm going, oh, this is going to be good. And I'm right there. He comes over and he says, Mayor, this is the best thing that's happened to the neighborhood. So that's all part of park development. People hate change, but once it happens, then they really buy into it, if you do it right. So again, it goes back to that, professionalism and attention to detail, and the fact that you're thinking of them and doing it right. The funny part to me of the whole thing every year, especially towards the end, is I would show up and I always wore my suit and tie, and my staff was all dressed up, but they would have aprons on because they'd be part of the help staff. But I kind of walk around and just manage things and keep the mayor here and the park board chair here and get the program going. And I had really good programming people that would really handle things. But I would walk up and down and people would tug at me. Hey, do you work here? Yeah. Well, it's too hot in here. Oh. So I would go over to the thermostat. I wouldn't do anything. I'd just go over there and I'd walk back on and, yes, you work here. Yeah, it's too cold in here. Oh, okay. Well, I'd walk around and I'd get hey, I know you work here. It's too cold. It's too hot. Okay. The whole evening was that way. They were either too hot and I never touched the thermostat. It was too hot or too cold. But that's my memory of the senior banquet. Every year they did it. About 1987, we had to redo the pond in Chisholm. It's a beautiful pond. It's a beautiful park, and it's a really key amenity as you come into the park. And we had to drain it in order for the contractor to come in and dredge it. So they bring the boat out there, and this thing is swirling around the boat. And we get a video camera, and we start watching these guys, and they come back to shore and say, we're going to get a net. We're going to find out what that is. They're getting up to this whatever the swirl is, and they get the net around it, and it's pulling away on the net, so Elton jumps in the water and grabs both ends of the net, and the thing is popping up and down, and it's rolling around, and Elton's huge, and he's dragging it to shore, and he gets it up, and then a couple other guys come over and help him drag it up on shore, and they open up the net, and Elton holds up an 89-pound catfish. 89-pound cat. We got pictures of it. Well, now we have a video of it too, because this whole thing was done by video, and the video became a sort of a legacy piece. Butch Dixon was a superintendent, and I called Butch over and I said, "We've got to do something with this thing." He says, "Yeah, we're taking it to Forest Park. They've got that big aquarium." So I said, "Okay, well, good luck with that." The next morning, I called Butch Dixon in, and I said, "Butch, what's going on?" No, it was in the afternoon. It was that afternoon. And I said, "Butch, what's going on with that catfish? Did you guys bury it?" He said, "No, Forest Park wanted nothing to do with that thing." He said, "We gave it to Elton, and Elton had a big barbecue last night, and they ate it." And I said, "Oh, well, they ate that thing?" He said, "Yeah, he invited all his relatives over, and they had a big catfish fry." And I said, "Okay, well, we got to watch Elton for the next 3 days to make sure that he lives." It didn't faze Elton at all. But then Debbie Smith, who worked in the library, created a video of the thing and put it to the theme of Jaws, interspersed pictures of Jaws on it. And that thing went around for 30 years as a video that was a classic.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
You could live anywhere. And when I first came to Hearst and looked at where to live, I would have to ask people, am I in Hearst or am I in Bedford? And I can remember going down one street and the guy said, "No, Hearst is over there. You're in Bedford over here." So people can live anywhere, but they do live in Hearst. And if it's like me, it's because it's a unique city that's had always a vision, a strategic plan. It always has paid attention to detail. It's always held us accountable to do our job as staff. Nobody gets a free ride in Hearst if you work in Hearst. And that means that the community is well maintained, it's well kept up, the citizens' interests are there. And for somebody like me, that follows within that professionalism and attention to detail. That's really enjoyable. It also allows you to be engaged in the community. It's so easy to be involved in this community. I was the president of Rotary, almost every other office besides that. I was active in the Arts Council for years, active on the YMCA board for years, on United Way for 9 years until they found out that I think you could only be on it for 6 years, and they got me off of that. And I'm still involved in Rotary, but there's a lot of opportunities to be involved. We mentioned Hearst as a somewhat unique community, but it's part of HEB, and that location is tremendous. And you put all that together, you've got a great school district, a great city with services, a great location. There was no reason to move.